Let's get started. Welcome to the Future of Work webinar. How do leaders cultivate a winning culture in a remote world? So, not webinar number 4. We talked about remote onboarding, and now we have Samuel Miller and Rodrigo Luna talking about culture in the remote world. So,
Yeah.
let's get started. Sam.
With that said, let's have some fun and answer the question: how do leaders cultivate a winning culture in a remote world? In this webinar, we're going to discuss what culture really is, why it's so important, share some examples of some successful company cultures, go over some actionable steps to building a positive work culture, and finally, ways to implement these design principles in workplace and meta to minimize your, finally, ways to use technology tools to actually help you build a culture for your company. Let's get to the next slide. So about Service Rocket. Service Rocket is a leading tech-enabled services company that accelerates the growth of software companies and their customers. By maximizing software adoption and return on investment, Service Rocket provides an ecosystem of capabilities that span software implementation, adoption, retention, and expansion. A trusted partner of Atlassian, Meta, digital AI, and companies around the world, Service Rocket is headquartered in Palo Alto, California. Our diverse workforce of Rocketeers are in Australia, Canada, Chile, India, Malaysia, the UK, and the US. They all consistently think team and delight the customer.
And keep growing, right?
Definitely. It's just a little bit about Meta. Workplace is the modern enterprise-ready collaborative communications platform built to change the way people communicate at work and foster community. Workplace has grown to over 7 million globally dispersed paid users since its launch in 2016. And as a company, we adopted Workplace internally 6+ years ago, and it has become essential to our hybrid work environment ever since. Next slide. Luna.
Okay, so these guys might seem familiar to you. We have been talking for the last minute and a half. So let's introduce my colleague Sam. He's based in Boston. For those who just joined and missed that introduction in the beginning of the webinar. A little bit about Sam. Sam is the product marketing manager for Workplace at Service Rocket. He specializes in a wide range of aspects in the marketing world. Customer value realization, collaboration, communication, and he's also an MBA in marketing strategy. Right? So, and Sam has been a Rocketeer for 2 years now, almost 2 years, right?
Yeah. Time flies, right?
Time flies. Yeah, I remember your onboarding, man.
Yeah.
Remote onboarding.
Yeah, that was fun. I remember we went over that. A little bit about Luna. He's the head of culture and experience at Service Rocket. He actually built the Service Rocket operations and culture for the Latin America office, specifically Santiago, Chile, before moving to London, where he's currently located. He designed the candidate experience and employee branding to highlight the culture and the values of and for what being a Rocketeer actually is, so that it can be consistent across all Service Rocket global offices. Yeah, and definitely one time for Luna, everybody. One time for Luna, everybody.
One time for Sam too. Wait, that was your applause effect?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, thank you. I know people on the outside of the screens are cheering for us too. So thanks for spending the next half an hour, 45 minutes with us. And let's jump into this, right?
Without further ado, what is culture? Yeah. Culture is, it's always in the news, whether you hear about a sports team's hardworking defense or defense first culture, or like the Boston Celtics, which has led them to success for decades with 17 championships. Or you hear the inverse, how toxic the culture is at a company, and how there's typically a lot of turnover, which can lead to companies shutting down. But to me at least, no one has ever really explained or defined what culture is. And for this webinar, we think that this is where we should start our discussion. As you can see on the slide, we pulled a few technical definitions in preparation for today. And Luna, which one of those do you resonate with the most? To be honest, at first, I like the Britannica definition because it's a simple way to explain it. But the more I read the Harvard definition, I lean that way because it gives more context and ways to actually experience culture. What do you think?
Well, I'm more an advocate on the Service Rocket definition of culture because I have to buy the brand. But I like the Harvard definition as well from this slide. So,
all right. So we're on. Now that that's settled, why should leaders actually care about their team's culture?
okay. Well, that I think that's my part now. So, well, we believe culture is important. So beyond all the data you can find, that pretty much, like, I think since 2020, when everybody went remote and we had to change pretty much every habit in the workplace, there's been a lot of information about how culture is important, right? How culture, how values, how onboarding, how the experience of employees, and but culture is important, right? Because it helps first of all, because it impacts every single aspect of your business, right? Of your operations, of your team, morale, engagement, everything. So in this time of, I'll say, great resignations, like every single company have faced a significant amount of employees leaving the company or coming in, changing roles and everything. So it has been super important in terms of retaining talent, and it's also been used recently more than ever as a competitive advantage to retain your talent and to also promote, to sell your company, to your brand as a great place to work as well. But, also data showing that companies with an open, inclusive culture enjoy much more better rates on employee engagement. That also has better rates and numbers in productivity and higher profitability as well. So with the increase of remote and hybrid work, cultivating this winning culture is not easy, of course. Like, we had to change a lot of habits, a lot of behaviors, and basically reinvent, like, the way most of the companies have been operated in the last time.
So in our research on culture, we really wanted to highlight a few examples of world famous cultures that have been immensely successful, that also actually have a clear set of values to help explain their company's culture. So we have Pixar on the left and we have Box on the right. Pixar, you might recognize them from a few indie films like the Academy Award-winning animated movie Soul, The Incredibles 1 and 2, or the old movie Toy Story 1, 2, and 3, amongst others. Now, Box.com is a secure, easy to use content cloud storage platform built for the entire content lifecycle, from file creation to sharing, co-editing, signature, classification, and retention. I know I've used this to multiple companies, including at Service Rocket. Now, there's a list of all these their company core values, and I'm not going to read all of these, but I do want to highlight a couple of them. For Pixar, the first one, people are more important than ideas. That's really powerful. According to fearlessculture.com, Pixar promotes psychological safety in order to nurture and encourage the first iterations of originality. The secret to Pixar's success lies in balancing creativity with collaboration. While most creative organizations promote internal competition, Pixar adopts a different approach. People are expected to get used to feeling embarrassed in public by showing their works in progress. Radical candor promotes transparent conversations, and colleagues are not meant to judge their peers, but their work. People respect each other. However, no one pulls punches to be polite. If you fear public speaking, you'll get over pretty quick at quick Pixar, right, Luna?
I think so. Are you afraid of public speaking, though?
A little bit, but get out of your shell like this.
You don't be doing a webinar, man. Come on.
Yeah, no, I'm good. The second one is everyone should be able to talk to anybody. That's so inclusive and welcoming to hear on your first day at work. You can actually walk up to the CEO and have a conversation with her or him. Even though employees may not use it every day, having the avenue open for two-way conversation from the intern to the CEO makes everyone feel welcomed and included. Now, for Box.com, the one I like, the first one I want to focus on is bring your blank self to work every day. They describe it as, we get our best work done when we act as our authentic selves. So come as you are and bring your diverse perspective, cultures, and backgrounds to the table. This resonated a lot with me, especially after coming to work at Service Rocket. I've never had a job where I felt like I could be myself. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm a huge dork. Like, I love Marvel, Star Trek, Star Wars. I'm a big dork. And I talk about that every day at work, especially in basketball, especially with Luna. And then the second one we want to focus on is make your mom proud. They describe it as Winning in the market only happens if we work in an environment of safety and trust. It's on us to create a place where our voices are heard and we do right by one another. Now, I know this makes you laugh a little bit, Luna, but it's such a simple and powerful concept that anyone will understand. If I embarrass my mother, which I definitely have on multiple occasions, I would be mortified and wouldn't want to show my face in the house that I grew up in. How do you feel about this one, Luna?
About mortifying my mom
Yeah,
or embarrass my mom. I think that was for my mom. It was a day-to-day thing. Uh, a lot of the things that you said resonate with me. I think it's been a great trend, and to the positive way. I think like a lot of companies are now or have started a few years back to focus on culture and values. And in my specification, when I joined Service Rocket, I came from a marketing and advertising background, so I didn't know. Oh, and this was like 10 years ago now, so I'm a legend here. Uh, I remember having a conversation with Rob, our CEO. He walked me through the values and the culture, and for me, that was like, um, okay, sounds super nice, but do you actually live this? And I was super surprised when I first joined. I had the chance to spend some time in the Palo Alto office, and we actually do. And then was my, as you described at the beginning of the webinar, it was my task to actually take this and implement it somewhere else. So it was a very, very nice challenge. So, but before we jump into the next slide, where we're going to talk a little bit about the experience of Service Rocket and the values and everything. So for those who are watching us, I have a question for you, and please feel free to add in the chat box. Do you feel like I'm not going to mention your name, so you can be anonymous? So, do you feel like your company has a successful remote culture? If you're working remotely, if you're not, do you feel like the culture of your company is successful?
I think we need
we have a yes. We have a yes there. Good.
Oh, there you go. I was gonna say, I think we need like the Jeopardy music. Do 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 do. No.
Oh, I'm not from. Sorry, I'm not. I'm from El Salvador.
You don't know Jeopardy? It's been on TV forever.
No.
All right.
Okay.
We got a from Steve.
Yeah. No, we're not gonna say names. So
all right.
Forget about it. Okay. So Sam described some examples of very successful and world famous cultures like Pixels and Box. And of course, I got to talk about ours, the Service Rocket. So Service Rocket, when we first think about our culture, it's all defined by our values, and we have 5 core values. And I'm not going to go into detail in each of them. If you want to read a little bit more about it, you can watch our videos on YouTube or just go to our website, servicerocket.com/about. But I gotta say, like, we really do base our decisions, business-wise, recruitment-wise, and everything in these values. Like the customer, share the knowledge, build process to drive outcomes, think team, and talk straight. So, and I want to focus specifically in one today, and it's about share the knowledge. And the reason why is because when all these transition from on-site, face-to-face to remote happen, like what we were struggling to see how do we can actually try to keep our culture alive. Right? And we're going to talk about some tips or some steps about how we managed to survive this transition, and we hope that those steps and those tips as well are helpful for you guys out there. And so share the knowledge for us is a very, very important part of our culture, because even though we're only about 300 people across Service Rocket, we're spread out away in 9 different locations. So it's very hard and super important for us to make sure that everything that somebody learns, we make it available for our community inside our Rocketeer community, right? So I think around 2015, we opened a space in our first office in Sydney called Rocketoria. And this space was meant to be a space where we, Rocketeers, we Service Rocket, can provide to our partners, to our customers, and to our employees a space where they can come and share the knowledge. That Rocketoria was all around having a cup of coffee and having the opportunity to sit down and coach and mentor somebody on your team, on a partner or a customer as well. So in the beginning, that was it. That was a space period. When we start all going to remote, and we were trying to discover how are we going to keep doing this. Then obviously we thought technology like workplace that help us a lot to make those communications and those knowledge transfer much more smoother. But when we miss or when we lost that face-to-face interaction, it's like, okay, we don't have the space. And we took a look back and said, like, okay, how do we can replicate what the whole idea behind the Rocketoria concept was? So from a physical space became a concept and principles and kind of a philosophy around it. And we wanted to bring that over to everybody in the company across 8, 9 different locations. And so the physical space became a concept, a philosophy, and then from that philosophy, it ended up, and the result of it is now an allowance, right? Because in a remote space, it's also hard, or a distributed space environment is really hard to get people to connect in one place when everything was shut down. So we passed from sharing the knowledge to a physical space to create a whole idea, methodology, concept, philosophy around that Rocketoria space when it's about mentoring, coaching, helping, collaborating, having a creative space to create amazing things for the company, for the team, for your colleagues, for partners, etc. To now take it to wherever people are. So, for example, now that if you're in Boston, I'm in London, and I can use my allowance of Rocketoria allowance to virtually have a coffee with you, send you a gift card, or just a voucher, Starbucks voucher, Uber Eats voucher, whatever. We have a team lunch or a virtual lunch, and we discuss an idea or have a brainstorm about it. So this is specifically about sharing the knowledge. And obviously that brought a different conversation now, but what are the challenges that everybody faces? So when, going back to the audience there, like what are the challenges, or what was the biggest challenge that you faced when everything went remote? Like when suddenly from one day to another was like, hey guys, you gotta work from home now. So everybody at home who's watching, feel free to type in the chat box, what was your biggest challenge? And Sam, I'll ask your question. You were one of the first Rocketeers who had this transition already, coming from a face-to-face company towards a fully remote company when we were just implementing. And I remember this because we had a very big challenge with your onboarding.
Yeah.
So
I was the guinea pig for the remote onboarding with the onboarder. That was fun. Thanks you for using or picking me as someone I could actually get some feedback on that. I actually really enjoyed it. But getting back to your question, it was a big culture shock, to be perfectly honest with you. I went from going to the office 5 days a week for like 8 to 6, and to walking down the stairs and turning on my computer to being at work. Granted, I'm very, very happy. I love it here. Don't ever really want to go back. But it was definitely a culture shock, especially since I didn't know anybody. And it's not like I could go in the cafeteria or I can go in the office and start talking with somebody. Everything was all across the world. The only person I knew before I got hired here was the CCO. And getting to know other people is pretty tricky. But I'm a very extroverted person, so I put myself out there. I have no problem embarrassing myself, and seeing what happens. What about you, Luna? I know transitioning from an in-person culture to a remote first culture was the challenge, especially as the head of culture at Service Rocket. What were your challenges?
well, yeah. So the challenges for us were basically how do we replicate as much as possible the culture that we used to have, the dynamic, the interaction, having that opportunity to just take a couple of steps and sit down next to a colleague to talk about the project, or to just ask for help or ask for guidance, whatever. So that was quite hard. In the beginning, I remember that having these Zoom meetings, Zoom calls, groups gathers was kind of exciting. But then after quarantines were being longer and longer and longer, that excitement just fade away. And we had to find different ways to do it. I remember we were trying to interact with different channels as well, finding different ways of creating different different cadence that we used to have for these all hands or team meetings or location meetings specifically, right? So that was, I think that was the biggest challenge. But also at the same time to make sure that how do we know what's happening, how people are feeling, how do we know what are the struggles of people that people are having. This is very hard to know when people are physically in the same space, because people try to come with the best attitude as possible. So you don't know, you have to have these conversations. But imagine how hard it is. Well, everybody experiences here how hard it is to realize this or to find out about this when you're not looking at the person, you're just looking at the camera. Where I can easily turn off the camera and just like, oh, sorry, my camera's not working. So we have to enable those spaces, right? That was also a very big challenge for us.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna list down. So we talk a little bit about that. So of course, I'm pretty sure that everybody in the call have different challenges as well, or some of the ones that we mentioned resonated with you. But some here, I would like to talk about three specifically, and we talk about that challenge between in person versus remote. How do we bring that service culture or that culture from the company you work to, from the face-to-face to the virtual environment? Well, we talk about a little bit about both of our experiences, you coming from the face-to-face and us trying to implement virtual one. And point number two for us, or from my point of view, is consistency, right? And consistency. I don't know how do you see that? So, for example, I had the opportunity to be in different service locations. In your case, Sam, being a fully remote service Rocketeer, when you talk to people about it, do you feel there's a consistency in terms of how the culture is perceived, no matter the locations?
It's hard for me to say 100% for sure because I don't know what it's like to actually be in a Service Rocket office. But considering I work from straight office to going 100% remote, I enjoyed it. Like I got, when I first got onboarded, they had tasks for me to do, things I needed to learn, projects for me to get started on. Thank you, Fede. Thank you, Gretchen. We also had, they also sent me this nice, cool Service Rocket shirt. So I was pretty excited about that. I got this nice Service Rocket spaceship. Made me feel a part of the team. And then they also, Julianne, she was awesome. She actually sent me some cookies and lunch for my first day. That made me feel warm and special, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So when I talk about consistency is we realized when we went remote that we had these traditions or these processes very local oriented. So when you try to compile everything together into one whole experience, actually that helps your culture to be stronger. It's like I always use an example, and I don't know if this happened for everybody who's watching. I don't know if this happened on your location, happened at your locations. Every time I go to a subway, it smells the same, no matter where in the world I am.
Ex-sandwich
artist. Smells the same.
I was an ex-sandwich artist. Yes, I always come home smelling like sandwiches and bread and meat.
So I remember when we were designing this experience, right? That's part of our culture. Like, how can we make it consistent? How can we make sure that every single person who is part of the company feels that they work with Service Rocket? And of course, we're going to have these local tastes, local traditions, but let's make sure that the dominant part of it is the global Service Rocket culture, right? And number three is a work-life balance. That's a very big challenge. And Sam, I'll go back to you again. Like you as a fully remote from the beginning. How was that a challenge for you? Like were you able to disconnect from your work life, even though you're at home? How do you handle that?
For one, I tried to set boundaries. So at first I was in one room in my house. It was actually the closet. I was trapped in the closet, but from there I transitioned to more being in the living room, and my wife would be at work, so it was just me in the house. I felt like I was like at the office. I would set times for me to have my lunch, schedule time for my lunch, and then when it came time around for me to end my day, like I had my processes put in place that This happened over time, but to help me feel like my day had ended. So I would finish updating any Jira tickets that I would have. I would respond to any questions that came in that I didn't get a chance to respond to, and I would try to close any windows that I had been using that I was done with, so I wouldn't have as much clutter when I open up my computer the next day. And then one big important thing, I turned off my computer. So you don't, you always feel like you can just jump back in and work, because especially when you work from home, the lines, the between the blends work from home is really hard to cut off. And also there's the times where you'd have extra work you needed to do, and I would sit down, have dinner with my wife, maybe watch a movie or so with her, and then I would start back up to finish whatever I'd done. But that only happens really now when it has to. I try just to not do that, so that way I can actually have that work-life balance and set rules for myself. What about you, Luna?
Correct. For me was hard too. Like I was in, well, my experience was very different. I was in the middle of transition in between countries. I was based in Santiago as well, before going remote, and so it was like a very weird situation for me. But I had similar struggles, right? You don't know, you don't realize when to stop, right? Like you're just right next to your desk, right next to your laptop, and and it's normal, like, because it becomes part of your like house life, for saying like that. So that was a very big challenge for us. But for those challenges, we also have list down 3 steps that will help, that we identify, that can help everybody to build these successful award-winning remote culture, right? That's, let's call it like that.
One thing, Luna, before we go to the steps,
Yeah.
can you back one slide real quick? When it's
Yeah.
in relation to remote onboarding, last month, Luna and Samantha, they had a great webinar that they put on to give you some best practices and some tips on how to standardize remote onboarding for everybody in the company. So I definitely recommend for any of the attendees to scan that QR code and then jump and watch that webinar later after you finish this one.
Yeah, I'll give you 5 seconds to scan the QR code.
One.
Yeah, okay. So 3 steps to build your successful remote culture, and we created this based on the on some research that we have done, and we kind of try to match what we at Service Rocket have faced and what worked for us, and we hope it's helpful for you as well. So I start with step number 1. It's all about transparency, and we talked a little bit about this a few slides ago, and where we were talking about trying to bring that face-to-face interaction. Like, we know how easy it is to acknowledge or to be aware of what's happening around us when we were in the same office space, right? When you move that to a remote environment, like, you really depend of communication tools, in this case, like Workplace, for example, or other or like Zoom, or like Blue Jeans, Skype for I don't know what could be, you name it. But transparency was a very important part for us, and it was, and one of the steps that one of the things that we focus a lot, how to make sure that people is aware of what's happening across the company, across the teams, across my location specifically, right? And then and I'll go back to you, Sam, again. Like, you've been in Boston. How aware? How do you feel about the way the communication was? You feel that? Did you feel like you were aware of what was happening, or you were like lost in the beginning and then it improved?
In the beginning, you're always drinking from a fire hose when you start a new job, especially when you can't go knock on somebody else's desk and ask them a question. But honestly, through Workplace, it was actually really, I felt, after I got a better understanding of what the company does, I felt like I understood where the company was going, what strategy we're working towards, on my team individually and at the company as a whole, because there was so much more transparency. And we have a couple of examples that we can actually show. There's transparency that the leaders at Service Rocket actually use, the tools that we use in Workplace and Meta to actually make sure everyone in companies understands what the company is actually going to be doing, which I'll show you in a second.
Yep. Oh, okay. So transparency, like, again, sorry if I literally clicked the keyboard by mistake. We're live, everybody. But yeah, so again, transparency also is it helps to build trust, and it helps to attract amazing talent as well. Improves efficiency because people actually know what they're working for, right? So if they know what's happening, and they know what's around them, what to expect, it make it easy for people to actually be more efficient. And it also, the performance in terms of the business, in my team, I see it, or I have seen it, like when they know how the work is impacting every single area of the company or the business or the team, that actually motivates them and the performance goes up, to be honest. So communication is all the key. Like how do we, and I'll raise the question now to the audience, like if they feel like in these times of remote culture environment, your company has been transparent enough for you. And again, I won't meet names, so let us know in the chat. Um, it will be, for me, it will be super interesting to see how other people perceive, because in the previous slide we talked about how leaders perceive that us leaders, we think that we're being transparent, but for sometimes people don't feel that way. And that's all about communication. Like how do we enable those spaces for people to talk about what's happening? And I know, Sam, you have prepared some examples of how we handle that, so I'll just jump into just let you start with that while I read the answers from our folks at home.
Yeah. One definite way we have transparency as a company is to use live streaming meetings with our teammates or anyone else who wants to use or who actually wants to watch the meeting. An example on the slides, you see the workplace leadership team at Service Rocket. We hold a meeting every single week where we align on what the work we've done in the past week and what we're going to be doing in the next following week that falls in line with our overall strategy. Typically, there's less than 10 people who attend this meeting, but that live. But there's usually other leaders like the CCO or CEO that watch the live stream later so they can keep up to date what's going on in the business. I have a funny example. The CCO likes to, Peter Marquez, he likes to watch live streams. And then while we're in the live stream, send me a message about what we're discussing. One time in the meeting, I made a joke saying, I bet Peter's listening. I'm surprised he hasn't messaged me yet. No, not kidding. 2 seconds later, he sent me a message on Workplace. Ha ha. I honestly couldn't take it. I broke out laughing, and then when I actually explained it to the rest of the team, everyone else fell over laughing as well. And then for another example was the company update. It's usually once a quarter, but we also have regular office locations, company updates where the CEO or other leaders in the company, they just talk about where we are financially, what's been working well, what hasn't been working well, what are we working towards, what are our strategic initiatives we're trying to hit. And that's huge in terms of transparency, because if there's something going wrong, everyone's going to know about it. That way, everyone can be held accountable for it. And once you know better, it's your responsibility to do better.
Cool. Thanks for that. Yeah. Step number 2 is the remote employee voice. Just to continue a conversation about it, right? We talked a little bit about this a few slides ago as well. And how do we know what's happening with our teams, with our employees? How do they feel? Do they feel that they know that they are aware of what's happening with the company, as you mentioned, financial status or project status, relationship with customers, with partners? Like, how's their morale in regards of the situation that we were facing, or the engagement with the company culture, with the company brand, or with engagement with their leadership as well? Like, it's very important that we as leaders and we as a company enable our employees or empower our employees to actually give them the space to let us know how they feel. But most important is for us to go to those channels and listen and be mindful and pay attention to what they're saying, right? So, Sam, you have a list of examples for this as well?
Yeah. So first and foremost, there's Ask Me Anything. We have all hand meetings. An example on the screen, you see a poll on the left. For this webinar, I created a poll that says, how do you define culture? And I asked everyone in the Service Rocket company in our cultural heritage group. And I got responses from probably like 15 to 20 people, specifically. And right after right after I made that first post, I actually tagged the leadership people on our company. So the CEO, CCO, the executive directors, and they were notified immediately about the question I'm asking. And they actually started to respond, especially, not surprising, but I was so glad to hear that we actually got a response from one of our newest teams in the Philippines about how they see culture. And actually some of that actually made it into the webinar. So that's a great way to make people feel heard. Then there's we have our growing pain survey, which we do every quarter. It's just really to get back feedback from all the individual employees about what's working, what's not working, what can we improve upon. And it's anonymized, so it's an opportunity for us to be perfectly honest. And then up on the right, you see an example of Ask Me Anything. On the right, you see on the far right of the photo on the right is Rob, the CEO. In the background and the checker, isn't that you, Luna, right?
That's me, like,
yeah, buddy. Great is they live stream these, and while you're in the live stream, people can ask questions through Meta. So Workplace through Meta, like what's going on, what do you have questions on? And the CEO, he encourages these. We do this on a regular basis, and actually really fun, because if I have a question on something, chances are there's 4 or 5 other people at the company that have questions on the same thing, and that helps everybody learn. And it helps everybody feel heard and feel a part of the company. But let me ask the audience, how do you feel heard at your company? Yes or no? Put it in the chat.
Yeah,
and so right ways that your company makes you feel enabled and heard.
We have a yes in the chat.
Hey,
good to know. But before we finish about step number 2, listening to the employee voice, remote employee voice, I'll quote Rob here, and I don't know if he's actually his quote or he took it from somewhere else. So I'll put the credits on him for now. And I remember we were growing our office in Chile very fast, and it was like we need to listen to what's happening. We need to hear what people are saying, what people are talking about, just so we can be proactive and not reactive. So that was one, and the other one is like the bigger we are, the dumber we are, right? So we don't know what we don't know, and if we don't ask, if we don't enable these spaces for people to more now in a remote environment, right? If we don't enable these spaces and encourage and empower our employees to do that, our team members, we're never gonna do. We're gonna never be proactive, and we'll be always putting fires down. We're gonna be firefighters. We're gonna be like running behind emergencies and trying to solve situations that could have been prevented, right? So
yeah.
Really important.
Yeah, we just got to comment this as we're looking for ways to encourage two-way dialogue. With the workplace from Meta, there's a perfect example would be there was a private airline company, and they were looking for ways they can cut costs. And one of their airline attendants, I can't remember if it was a he or a she, they recommended that instead of when people board, they get a glass of champagne, which will be poured out of a large bottle. What ended up happening was most of the bottle wasn't used, and they ended up throwing it away. So what they did through Workplace, they communicated that with the leadership team, because the leadership team asked for opportunities for ways for they can cut costs, operating costs. They told them what happened, and they recommended getting the single serving bottles, and that saved them, instead of spending $150 per bottle, they were spending $45 or $30 per small bottle. And it saved them so much money that they were able to stay in business for longer. Just from that one, there was other examples that they had, but just from that, there was such a way to save so much money, because when you leave the airplanes, there'd be bottles upon bottles of champagne that just weren't drunk, which is just a waste of money.
Yeah. Okay, you ready for step number 3?
Let's do it, Luna.
Okay, lead by example. If you are in this webinar and you're a leader in your company, your team, you're managing a team, then make sure that you are the first one to do the things that we are asking our teams to do. All right. We need to build that foundation. People will trust us or not, depending on our actions, right? If we say we need to talk straight, like it's one of our values, and we don't do it as a leaders, like that's not going to be helpful to build that culture in between our teams. So we need to be multipliers of those values and of the culture that we are encourage people to follow, right? We define what daily working practices look like, and this is I take this very deep with my team. Is like I encourage them to have this work-life balance. So I encourage them not to follow a work schedule, but instead of organizing their time so they can achieve their goals. Some people are more efficient or more creative during specific times in the day, and I'm okay with that as far as they can support our company to goals, and they can organize their time in whatever way it works for them now in a remote environment. I think it's much easier to do that now. Meet in person when it's possible. I'll circle back to Rocketoria concept, right? Any place, you don't need to be at an office to meet in person. Like you can use these digital channels, and just try to build that cadence and try to be that channel with every person in your team, so you can have that contact. They can have that contact with you, and you can keep on being that multiplier, right? And Sam, do you have any other example that you want to share with us for this?
Definitely setting time to be setting in time intentionally to actually meet with one another. That's huge, because like with myself, I have a one-on-one with the CCO every other week, just so we can get some understanding of not just what I'm working on, what my challenges are, just get to know me as a person. You know, I've known him for 10 plus years before I started at Workplace, so we have a good rapport. He knows more of me, my family. He's actually in my wedding. But what that does, though, it gives you an opportunity to have more intentional conversations and opens up your world, as opposed to just only talking about work. You get to know a person as an individual, and it also helps you get an understanding of what motivates them. Not necessarily you want to use that to get people engaged and to work harder, but having that information makes it easier for you to get to know them, to find out what makes them tick, and to build a stronger relationship in the long run. Perfect honest.
Cool. Okay, and I added this screenshot in this slide because I want to highlight two of our leaders here, Rob and Peter. Sam has been talking about Peter a lot. I did mention Rob a couple of slides ago. And the reason why I'm adding these examples and lead by example with Rob and Peter is because in the case of Rob, he worked with employees, with all the team of Service Rocket back then in what was 2006 when we first established the Service Rocket values. That actually our values were established by full-time Rocketeers, and since then he literally has been applying them. And this is a clear sample how he shared the knowledge. He had built the cadence of updating every single person on Service Rocket through live update in a weekly basis, so people know. He shares with people what he has been doing for the whole previous week, and what is going to be the focus of him, the company, for the next upcoming week. Status about benefits, projects, things that he's been handling, things that we have figured out about other things that are creating friction across any of our locations. Like he uses these spaces to build that bridge and provide transparency of the things that are happening around. Similar to Peter, he uses these channels specifically to keep people updated on the performance of projects, teams, whatever. Also, he's always, as you, Sam, said, I've seen how involved he gets to know what's happening inside the teams, right? And to be proactive and instead of reactive to action on those things that are happening. So if you're a leader in this, and you're in this call, just lead by example. Make sure that you are a multiplier of the company culture that you're representing, right? Okay.
And just a little quick recap before we finish things up. What is culture? A company's culture expresses goals through values and beliefs, and guides activity through shared assumptions and group norms. To me, the most important aspect of this, and thank you for the survey that I sent out, I got this feedback. Most importantly, it must be consistent and shared by the majority of employees. If you set values in the team, but you don't do it consistently, then you really don't have a culture. Why is culture important? Honestly, you get more productive employees. increase in quality of new hires, and executives agree that culture is important and affects the company's valuation. Some of the challenges with building culture for remote workers, it's in person versus remote. Initially, it may be challenging, but by using the right technology tools like Workplace and Meta, this is very accomplishable. Consistency, it's hard but doable by setting the right examples and values that employees can follow, which you can do by creating your own company values that everyone is held accountable for. Like I said, once you know better, it's your responsibility to do better. Work-life balance is forever changing, but leaders hold the keys to making sure that employees, especially remote employees, know how to draw that line so they can be fully engaged without, honestly, becoming burnt out. And then 3 steps to building a remote culture: be transparent so that all employees feel that they know where their company is striving towards collectively. Enable employee voices, helps employees feel heard in the company, which keeps them engaged and more productive. With Workplace for Meta, this is accomplished with comments on posts, reactions, ask me anything, and so much more. And then also finally, lead by example. Just like the core values of Box.com, leaders are expected to set the model for acceptable behavior that the team is held accountable for, just like mom does or did for all of us when we were growing up. We challenge you as a leader to step up to the plate and lead by example and be transparent and listen when your employees are actually trying to speak to you. Next slide for me, Luna. And just so you know, our next upcoming webinar is entitled The Future of Work: Top Strategies to Drive Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Hybrid Workplace. In this webinar, we'll explore the rise and importance of DEI objectives since the start of the pandemic, the challenges of implementing DEI objectives with a hybrid remote workers, and then solutions leveraging collaboration technology to build psychological safety for your employees around your DEI initiatives. On the left, you'll see a QR code that you can scan so you can register for the next webinar right away. And don't forget, just because since you attended this webinar, you will receive an email with a recording of it that you can share with your coworkers with the accompanying blog that we've written about this topic as well. Thanks, Nell. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay. We're going to open for questions now. And you can type it in the chat box as well. And in the meantime, thanks, Sam, for the invitation for the upcoming webinar.
Yeah, thank you for jumping in and knocking us out the park, Lou. It's been fun. I'm looking forward to do it again next month.
Okay, good. Okay, we have a question here. I'll write it. Hopefully you can answer it, or I can answer it. But how can remote workers help instill a bit of themselves in their company culture?
Honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is actually just expressing themselves. Where we have the cultural heritage group inside a workplace at Service Rocket, and this was sponsored by the executive team. Where and you might be able to explain a little bit more better than I, Luna, but we gave opportunities for all the employees at Service Rocket to have a personal day or a holiday where they can give back to something that they feel that it's important to them. And the only way to actually be able to accomplish this is everyone wrote not like a blog, but a one-pager about what's important to them, who is important to them, why they believe that this is important to their cultural heritage, especially since we're a global company. We've got so many different diverse responses from all over the world. And then they were enabled to take that day off and do something for themselves. Like my boss, she worked with Best Buddies. She actually took the day off last Friday, where she donated her time to help others and for a marathon, so she can generate some money for Best Buddies. And it was a great experience. She loved it. She's been doing it for years, and that's just one example. We got, Luna, I think it was like 200 options, 200 different stories about cultural heritage.
201. No, I don't remember, but we have a bunch. We have a bunch of them.
All right. What do you think?
First, you have to be in the right company, right? Like, as you said, like you finally landed in a company where you can be yourself. I think if there's something in your workplace that is stopping you from being yourself, then you're probably in the wrong place, right? So find a company that aligns to your values, right? That's the first one. And then don't just feel comfortable sharing, like, aligning to those values or adopting them. And then I think if you're comfortable doing that, you'll be able to be yourself. Right? That's what I think. And don't be afraid, like people of like what people's going to expect. Like, probably people don't like me. Like I'm outside of the company as well. Like and and it shouldn't be something that people should fear about. Like, I think it's normal to be the same person everywhere. Right? We have two more questions.
Actually, we got another question, 3 questions actually.
Okay. Okay. Let's go ahead.
Like, what role should take the initiative when trying to promote a certain culture remotely? How do you make it stick?
Oh, wait, can you repeat that? I'm trying to find it.
So it's on the Q&A. So who
okay, good. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
should take the initiative when trying to promote a certain culture remotely? And how do you make it stick? That's a question right up your alley, buddy.
Okay, I'll say that you can funnel things from the bottom to up. Like, it has to be from the top to the bottom. Like, leaders are the representation of, should be the ambassadors of your culture. Leaders in the company should be people who are living your values, right? If that would be my who, like that would be my first answer. Like, for example, we wouldn't have values. It would be for Rob, who decided the company should have core values to guide or to be the North Star that we need to follow. And then people who are leaders in the company shouldn't be leaders if they're not aligned with their values. Like, it's not going to work. It's a no match immediately, right? So I think that's on us as leaders. Like, we need to be the living face of those values and that culture. Right? I hope that answers your questions, anonymous attendee.
Yeah, we got another one. How do leaders in large companies culture foster connections? They can't meet bi-weekly with every employee in like an 1,000 employee company. So what would you recommend? Or what tools do we use at Service Rocket to accomplish this?
Delegation. Like, if you're like, I don't know if I understand the question properly. If, like, you can't talk to 1,000 people at the time, like, you create teams, like you divide those 1,000 people in small group that are manageable, and then you name team leaders, co-leaders, or you name it, right? Reference that you use people, or not use, probably not the right word, but you name or you delegate people who you know are aligned to your company values, to your company culture, and that they're going to be the multipliers who brings that experience to that to those groups, right? And then that's how I would approach it. It's impossible. Like, we see it right now. We're not even thousands, but since we are all spread away, like, we have to find a way to actually find the right person to be that multiplier who will replicate what we're trying to build across all the locations. Like, that's it doesn't matter if that person is in the same location, but at least that person will be in contact with a group of people that will follow their lead, right? And will adopt their he or she will need to lead by example, right?
Yeah, I think also we use this with Workplace at Service Rocket. A couple things. One, we share the knowledge a lot. We have everyone, each one of us, all the managers, the leaders, any employee of Service Rocket is encouraged to create a video about what they're working on, what projects they've done. We were working on a productization service, and at the end of our productization service, we actually created a video to explain to the company what we were actually doing, how it's going to benefit the company. And then we also used some hashtags, so hashtag share the knowledge, so that whenever someone's looking up in their thread, that will pop up so they can get an understanding of what the reason for this video is, and how we're living through the actual culture of the values that the leadership team has actually accepted, and then enabling each individual to be their authentic self. So we have a whole bunch of different groups. So like the music group, people post. My buddy Chris, he posted today about a song that he just likes and just wants everyone else to know or to hear, to either brighten their day or give them some energy. We also have the friends and families group, where people post. I posted it when I had my son 6 weeks ago, and everyone was saying, "Oh my God, he's so cute, fantastic." That made me feel all warm and fuzzy. Made me feel like I'm not alone in my living room in Boston when everyone else is across the world. Made me feel small. Made the company feel smaller. Excuse me, and helped me feel like I was a part of a community. And I think we just got one more question, one more comment. Let me read it out. When using tools like Workplace, it's easy for subcultures to emerge, and some of the values might not be aligned with what leadership wants to promote. Do you have any tips on keeping platforms aligned to company values? Leadership doesn't always have time to monitor. I have one idea, but do you want to take this one first, Luna?
Go ahead. I'll reread the question again.
Yeah. So in terms of tips to keeping platforms aligned with company values, when you actually create the group, there's a section where you talk about in Workplace where you can have like an about section, which explains what the actual group is about. And then what we also recommend is making a post that you pin to the top of the group where it has the instructions of what this group is about, what the topics we're going to be discussing, making sure they're all aligned with what the company values are. And then also definitely recommend having an administrator for each one of the groups that are created. So that way, if the topic of conversation goes left of field or it's not aligned with what the company values are, they can either delete it and stop that conversation, or just ask the original poster to amend what they're talking about, so that way it stays in line with what the topic is. Luna?
I agree with the part where people like with leaders not always have the time to monitor. I think well that's a hard one for me, to be honest, because I'm a big advocate of like there has to be like a guideline and yeah, sometimes like not sometimes but not all the time people will be fully 100% aligned with it, but they need to acknowledge and understand that that's the line that we're going to follow, right? Even though I'm a leader, I won't be able to monitor what's happening, but but that's what we set of rules. Like you don't go out from your house and start like burning things around. Like that's not like you try to follow the values that you as a person have, right? I think it's really hard for me to answer from that point of view. I think leaders that they need as leaders, we just need to keep to be repetitive and keep multiplying the message, like keep repeating the same message. Like we are aligned to these values. These are we're going to use across all the company to be successful. That these are the values that are going to guide us to whatever decision we're going to take. And it's okay if people are not what do you say, like uh, have their own subcultures, these going to say, and can be themselves, but they should be themselves and still acknowledge that they need to follow this because is what the company's base foundation is about, right?
Yeah.
And I have one more question before we go, and what are some things that Service Socket has done to help improve communication amongst remote employees? Um, I'll answer that, and we try to build cadence. We try to be spaces. We try to build spaces where people can raise their voices, and always in the beginning was hard to make that because it's like it was built pretty much or introduce a new whole habit in the dynamic of the company and the dynamic of the teams. Um, we we have enabled company meetings every month or office location specific related all hands town halls where we can talk about local issues or local situations, local things that are happening in specific locations. Uh, we have invested in different communication tools like Workplace, uh, in and also we try to be transparent in the way that we deliver the information and to be consistent as well. Like build the cadence, be transparent, and also I'm not gonna name all the tools. We can talk for another half an hour about them, but uh, we're constantly looking for ways to make sure that people are receiving the message. And I'll quote again, Rob. Again, we don't know what we don't know. right? And that's why we try to be proactive in the way that we ask people for the feedback, for the ideas, or even though it's through an AMA or through a survey, that we want to make sure that everybody across the company feels listened, and we can do it. And we have done it. I would like to say like we're perfect. We have done it perfectly. There's always room to improve, but we're constantly looking for ways to make it better for everybody. So
Thank
that's
you, everybody. It's 2:03. We are over the top of the hour. Thank you so much for joining. It was a great topic, a great webinar. Luna, you're the man. I really appreciate all the things you've done. Thank you to everyone else for joining, and look forward to seeing you guys next month. Have a great day.